What's up, everyone? It's Dakota, and welcome back to another Modern video. And today we're taking a look at another deck that kind of got pushed out of the format due to Cascade decks becoming very, very powerful. And this deck, honestly, seeing a resurgence, I think because of all the decks that are jamming Scion plus Leyline in the format, which is not really a surprise that anybody's doing that, but kind of a surprise that this is the deck that is kind of coming back and actually making a pretty big impact on the format and shutting down those decks very nicely. So today we're going to be taking a look at Indomitable Creativity. We're going to be looking at specifically the Jund version because over the last few challenges in the last few weeks, it seems like it's been doing the best while not being necessarily the stock list, because we're used to seeing kind of the 4 and 5 color builds that get to use like Leyline Binding and some of the other, domain effects like that, and get to splash into some other good cards like Teferi Time Raveler, get like counter spells and prismatic endings and things like that. But it seems like the Jund Creativity list looks pretty sweet. We're going to be taking a look at it. Again, it just seems like kind of more of a streamlined version than the 4 and 5 color builds, which have been kind of historic for these decks because Jund and 4 or 5 color were kind of jogging for position at like which build was necessarily the best build, and this has a little bit more in the tank than most of the other Indomitable Creativity builds. But of course, before we get too deep into the deck itself and we kind of go through the ins and outs, as always, if you're not already subscribed to the channel and you want to see more videos like this, I post a lot of Modern and Pioneer content, along with some other longer form videos. So if any of that interests you, please consider subscribing to the channel and ring notification bell so you know when those videos get posted. And it's a free, easy way to support me and my content. If you would like to go even further with your support, I do have a membership going on my channel. I have a few different tiers depending on how you would like to support, and you get access to some pretty cool perks with some new ones coming in the future as well, kind of as like the channel grows and everything like that. So if that's something you'd like to do, consider becoming a member today as well. So Indomitable Creativity is based around this card, you guessed it, named Indomitable Creativity. The deck names are so creative. So Indomitable Creativity in the Sweet Prosperity Post card frame is triple red and X for sorcery. You destroy X target artifacts and or creatures, and for each permanent destroyed this way, its controller reveals cards from the top of their library until an artifact or a creature is revealed and exiles that card. Those players put the exiled cards onto the battlefield, then shuffle. So Indomitable Creativity allows you to destroy up to any number of artifacts and or creatures. It can be your opponent's, but obviously not that good. We want to do it to our own. And we're going to reveal until we hit a creature or an artifact, and we're going to put those into play, and then we shuffle. In this deck in particular, and kind of what you've probably found out from people playing Cascade spells and kind of like these other kind of broken spells, we're only looking for one target in our deck. We're looking for specifically one card, and that is Archon of Cruelty, which has been kind of like the reanimator creature of choice since it has been printed into the format. We even see it seeing a little bit of play in a Legacy as well. Obviously, something like an Atraxa ends up being a little bit more desirable, I think. But for what Archon actually offers to the format in conjunction to like what is going on, Archon is probably the best one, if not like top 2, top 3 reanimator targets. So it's double black and 6 for 6/6 flying creature. When it enters the battlefield or attacks, target opponent sacrifices a creature or a planeswalker, discards a card, loses 3 life, you draw a card and gain 3 life. So this, in a way, can allow you to race sort of like what your opponent has going on. Of course, in those, Scion plus Leyline of the Guild Pack builds, of course, we see things like Leyline Binding and whatnot, but not really a lot in terms of like mass removal. So if you can kind of weather the storm, you're going to get to a point where you can Creativity for X equals like 2. You're going to have Archon come into play. They're going to sack 2 creatures. And then even if they have like a Scion left over, if they're not able to get rid of one or both Archons, chances are they don't have, 2 other creatures besides Archon in play. And even if they do, Archon, you're going to end up gaining, 12 life over the course of this, and then your opponent is going to have to sacrifice their creatures. They're going to discard a bunch of cards, and even if they have a Scion left over, all they can do is block. They're going to gain 4, sure, but then they're also going to take 6 damage and have to figure out how they're going to deal with 2 Archons while also getting to keep their Scion of Draco around. And even if they decide not to keep it and they keep something like a Kavu or something like that, you're not going to race 2 Archons. Like, there's no deck that can really race, 2 Archons fairly unless you're like absolutely flooding the board with, Scion of Dracos and other flying creatures that are also big. So definitely the target of choice for this deck. There's also a little bit more going on here as well. So we have the basic idea of the deck. We want to creativity, and we want to get into Arcana cruelties. We can do it as soon as turn 4, thanks to a card called Dwarven Mind, which says that it enters the battlefield tapped unless you control 3 or more other mountains, and if it enters the battlefield untapped, you create a 1/1. So your mana base is essentially based around mountains to get this to come into play untapped. And you have something like Rage Theater, you have Stomping Grounds, you have other cards like Commercial District, which is also another Surveil land, you have Blood Crypt and things like that, and you're able to kind of, go and get these Dwarven Mines on turn 4, untapped, and then you immediately have a target for Indomitable Creativity. You have something like Fable the Mirror Breaker, which is going to make it 2/2, and then whenever it attacks, it makes treasure tokens. So eventually you are able to kind of like make, on second main phase, in an ideal world, you fetch for like a 3rd untapped land, you play Fable, you make a Goblin, say go, your opponent does nothing or whatever. You end up attacking with the token, you end up making a treasure token. They don't block, you keep your Goblin around, and then you play your 4th land, which is going to end up being like a Dwarven Mind. You're going to make a 2nd token, and with your 4 lands plus your treasure token, you can target both the Goblin Shaman token and the Dwarf token you made, and put 2 Archons into play on turn 4. Now, is that going to happen pretty often? No, but this deck can, in theory, kind of mess with your opponent a little bit, thanks to cards like Thoughtseize, Bitter Triumph, and Lightning Bolt, like that, to kind of mess with what your opponent has going on. And while the 4 and 5 color builds are pretty much on kind of the play Indomitable Creativity, and they have a little bit of like a bonus because of Teferi Time Raveler being able to cast Indomitable Creativity and instant speed, this deck opts to play just more ways to get things back. So Persist being one of the, I would say the pretty obvious one that most people might know about. So Persist, 1 and a black, sorcery, whenever return target non-land creature from your graveyard to the battlefield with a -1/-1 counter on it. So you can put Archon in the graveyard, either if it just naturally dies, if your opponent's able to remove it, discarding to Chapter 2 of Fable of the Mirror Breaker. Bitter Reunion is also this other card where you can, enters the battlefield, you may discard a card, and if you do, you draw 2 cards. So it's a way to kind of dig for your Persist, Indomitable Creativity, or Transmogrify, which we'll get to here in a minute. Even, I guess, in a way, dig for answers, but a lot of the times this is going to help you get like Archons out of your hand. And then you can pay 1 sacrifice to give creatures you control haste until end of turn. So if you kind of like play a turn off, or if you have kind of like the Goblin Shaman making treasure tokens, you're able to put an Archon into play and then sack a Bitter Reunion and essentially get 2 triggers from an Archon on the same turn, which a lot of the time is going to end up being lights out regardless if it's persisted or not. Which does set up like a turn 3 persist into sacking Bitter Reunion to kind of attack, which, fills the void of having to, on turn 4, get it attacking with the Goblin Shaman, it not die, it make the token, and then you also have a fetch land or just a Dwarven Mine to be able to put into play and, creativity, both those tokens. So where there's like 4 or 5 cards that you need, Bitter Reunion has the added bonus of, you kind of just want the Archon in your hand early, you ditch it, and then you have like multiple draws to finding something like a Persist, which, ends up working out very well for you. Transmogrify is the other card that we mentioned. You exile target creature, and then that creature controller reveals cards till they reveal a creature card, and then you put that card into the battlefield, shuffle the rest of your library, or shuffle the rest into their library. So Transmogrify is essentially just a creativity that can only be done for 1. And if your opponent somehow gives you another creature, you can end up doing that as well. But generally speaking, like Transmogrify works the same way as Indomitable Creativity, just you're only going to find a creature instead of like an artifact. And of course, you can't destroy multiple things like Indomitable Creativity can. So that's essentially the main deck. You have Wrenn and 6 in here for the fact that it can also help you make land drops. I mean, 2 landers with at least 1 fetch land, and then, action is just kind of what Wrenn and 6 decks have thrived on. Of course, we've seen Jund like Sagavan, which is trying to take probably 3 of the best, probably top 5, top 10 modern cards in the format and like kind of mash them together and do things. And it's really cool once kind of like the engine gets going, but it's very, very fair compared to what the rest of the format is doing. And it feels like typically a lot of the time is not very good, hence, the kind of like the lack of play it sees. And I'm probably not even really the lack of play it sees, like the lack of results it really puts up. But this allows you to, get back your fetch lands that can go and get future Dwarven Mines and just kind of wreck the game from there. You have a Boseiju who endures, so you can end up getting Boseiju back. You're just kind of like destroying your opponent's lands and, their hopes and dreams a little bit until they eventually run out of fetchables. And then, it just ends up becoming kind of like a Stone Rain type effect. And of course, like the ultimate as well, getting to be able to get back Persist, Thought Seizes, Bitter Triumphs, Lightning Bolts in a pinch as well. With its emblem, basically giving your cards retrace via the emblem. So pretty neat stuff there. You have the sideboard. You have more Boseijus. You have Alpine Moons to name. I think mainly, if I remember right, you definitely want to name something like an Urza Saga with an Alpine Moon because it ends up just killing the land. Like they'll just never get to play it, and if they do play it, they're going to be very disappointed. They don't understand how the interaction works. You have Pick Your Poison, which is probably one of the most popular cards. Seeing some main deck play from a lot of other decks, and that's kind of where like the green mainly comes for the sideboard cards. A lot of the times you end up seeing a splash for like barely any cards for the third color, but in the main, not so much. On the sideboard, yes. Turn to Earth ends up choosing 3 cards in your graveyard. You choose up to 3 cards in graveyards. The owners shuffle those cards into the libraries. Gain 2 life, flashes back for 2, instant speed, so you can kind of mess with your opponent if they're trying to persist things back by chance. You can also get back some of your Archon of Cruelties as well if they end up in the graveyard and you don't really have like a persist or anything like that. It's just kind of a way that you can kind of put cards that care about being in the graveyard back into their opponent's library, so forcing them to have to get them back in there while also being able to protect your cards from the like surgical extractions and other graveyard hate that are kind of running around the format that aren't Leyline of the Void. For Veil of Summer, definitely very good against Scam. I guess Turn the Earth as well, I'd like to note, is also pretty decent against Scam. If even if they take it and it goes to the graveyard, if you have 2 mana available to you, you can actually tag their evoked elemental before it actually comes back due to its own trigger. So pretty neat stuff there. But Veil of Summer is going to stop the Grief opponent directly in their tracks. They're not going to get the card. If they want to get it back, that's fine. They're still going to get got by Veil of Summer. And then you're going to get to draw a card as well, while also getting to protect your hand and set up, one of those possibly like turn 2, turn 3 plays where your opponent is just going to be absolutely put through the ringer, even if they follow up their turn with like a Dauthi Voidwalker. They're going to have to find a way to get out from underneath an Archon, especially on your turn 2 when you're able to just immediately dump it in the graveyard after they try to scam you. Storm's Wrath, 4 mana, deals 4 damage to each creature and each Planeswalker. 4 damage is pretty big for a lot of the things in the format. The Planeswalkers and stuff, I don't know how it's like super relevant that is necessarily, but Storm's Wrath for like the random people that are maybe playing Rhinos, you're going to be able to tag the Rhinos with this while not killing your Archon of Cruelty, or even really your Ren and 6s, depending on how early they got down, killing opponents' Planeswalkers and things like that. Pretty neat stuff, and you can kind of push and afford the mana, again, with like the little bit of ramp of like Fable of the Mirror Breaker, and of course just getting to disrupt your opponent enough and ensure that you're going to hit your land drops thanks to Ren 6. And lastly, we have 2 Terracodon. There is, and has always been, some targets that have been not Archon of Cruelty in the sideboards. We'd seen like Emrakul as like a card that you can go and get, and you can attack your opponent, and they essentially sack their board, and it's game over. You had cards like Sarah's Avenger or something like that. One of the ones where like you named a card type and your opponents couldn't cast spells of that, you had protection. You and your creatures had protection from like that type or something like that. So that's something that we'd see, but we've seen like Terracodon take its place. It's a 8 mana 9/9, 2 green and 6. Where when it enters the battlefield, you destroy up to 3 target non-creature permanents, and for each of those, they make it 3/3. So you could like destroy their Leyline, their things suck now, and then you can blow up like 2 of your lands or whatever, like 2 random non-creature permanents that you have, and then you have 2 3/3s against like one of their 3/3s, And then, of course, you have a 9/9 as well. So it just gets rid of some problematic permanents that are kind of like locking you out of the game. You know, if they have something like a ensnaring bridge, any lock pieces kind of like that. And you might see from Tron even blowing up other Tron pieces as well to kind of like set them back. Dealing 3 is kind of a nice number because you're going to get to blow up those lands, and like they're going to have 3/3s, but you're going to end up having, you know, a 9/9 and a 6/6 flyer that's going to make them sack creatures and whatnot. And it's just not going to be good for them. Like, they're not going to win that race, especially if you can creativity for X2, X3 to kind of get to that point where you can get 2 Archons and potentially Terrastodon. It is a little bit more random, but with enough cards, like, you're not going to be sad to hit 3 Archons unless your opponent has been given hexproof in some way. So that's something to kind of keep in mind as well. If your opponent has hexproof, you cannot target them with Archon of Cruelty, so you won't get to drain them, discard a card, and they sack a creature, or draw a card and gain 3 life. They're essentially just going to be 6/6 flyers, which is pretty sad, but I don't think there's really a lot of people playing, you know, the Leyline of Sanctity and things like that in super high numbers. So, you know, there may be a time or two where you get got by it, but I would say the majority of the time you're pretty safe to just kind of trigger Archon from entering or attacking. So it does not stop you from attacking, though, obviously, unless they have like bridge or something like that, but you won't get the trigger and things like that. But 6/6 flyer, especially multiples, ends the game pretty quickly, even without their trigger. So that is Indomitable Creativity for the Modern format. Overall, I mean, I was a pretty big fan of this deck. I played it in one of the Modern events for Mana Traders, like way back when. I played a little bit of like the Jund version as well. That seems a little bit more streamlined. There's a few different ways to kind of get Archon in the graveyard to kind of fuel that persist package while also maintaining the core of the deck, which is kind of creativity on turn 4 for 1. Go get an Archon, you know, get your card back, end up, you know, making your opponent sacrifice a creature. And with a lot of people, you know, again, playing this like Scion package, you know, you're able to get to the board early enough where they play their turn 2 Scion, you can turn 3, you know, get back your creature and then attack them. And even if they play like Ragavan into Scion or what have you, chances are you're able to just persist it back, get rid of like the Ragavan, give it haste, attack, and get rid of their blocker and hit them for, you know, 5 damage. You already drained them for another 3, so they've lost 11 life, you've gained 6 life, drew 2 cards, and they've discarded 2 cards. Is pretty hard to come back for any deck that essentially starts on like a mold of 6, thanks to having Leyline put onto the battlefield on their first turn of the game. Again, doesn't mean that it's an automatic slam dunk to win, but there's definitely a lot of lines, you know, by turn 3 and turn 4 where you're going to be able to get multiple Archon triggers, whether it's getting, you know, 2 triggers off of 1 or just factual getting 2 triggers off of, you know, 1 spell and things like that. So that is the Indomitable Creativity deck for Modern. If you enjoyed the video, please consider subscribing to the channel and ring notification bell so you know when future videos get posted. Of course, I post a lot of Modern and Pioneer content along with longer form videos as well. And it's a free, easy way to support my channel, so please consider doing so today. Of course, if you would like to support me even further in a monetary variety, I do have channel memberships, things like that. Again, looking to kind of expand kind of as the channel expands. So if that's something that interests you as well, please consider doing so as well. And also be on the lookout for, I believe, on Wednesday or Thursday, I'm going to be putting out a video kind of recap or giving some thoughts and opinions and things to know kind of to go into the Pro Tour. We've been making sort of a tradition out of it for every Pro Tour event that has gone on, and at least this will have kind of like a metagame breakdown or idea of what is going on in the meta. It'll end up being standard in Outlaws of Thunder Junction, what have you. So if any of that interests you as well, be on the lookout for that, which means more of a reason to subscribe and ring notification bell so you know exactly when that video goes up. But that's going to do it for me in this video. Hope you all enjoyed, and I hope to see you all in the next one.